Welcome back to Drunk on Writing and the Stephen King dissections, brought to you in part through the patronage of Ariya North. Today, we are digging into the 1989 adaptation of King's novel Pet Sematary, a 103-minute long advertisement for fences. Picket fences, posts on rails, even those electric ones with barbed wire at the top. Directed by Mary Lambert and starring a who's who of TV personalities, supposedly giving it their all, to rather mixed results. We'll pretty much talk about all of them. But before we really get into it, let me just remind you that if you enjoy this episode, please be sure to give it a like, give it a share, tell your friends about it, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and if you would like more episodes more often, along with a bevy of exclusive goodies, head on over to drunkonwriting.com and sign up. I rather like it there, and I hope you do too. Now, one of the first things that I noticed about this adaptation, even before watching it, so well before even realizing that overwhelming need for fences. Seriously though, how many trucks need to speed by your house, and how many times does your kid need to run into the street before you at least put up a hedge, do something? I mean, geez. Was that it wasn't released until 1989, 6 years after the book was published, and 5 after the film rights were sold. That's right, after less than a year after the book dropped. After 32 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and with 700,000 hardcover copies in print, and apparently after declining several other offers, including a firm $1 million from a private consortium, the New York Times reported back in 1984 that Stephen King sold the book to George Romero for a handshake, a token payment of roughly $10,000, and a healthy share of any profits from the movie. Considering the film had the biggest opening weekend ever for one of his adaptations, set the record for the opening weekend box office at that time of the year, and went on to make $57.5 million on an $11.5 million budget, I think it's fair to say that was a pretty good deal. And that's despite reviews like this one from the Washington Post. One of the key lines in both film and book is sometimes dead is better. Sometimes, though, red is a whole lot better. Ouch! That's just painful. I had to include that tagline. You know I had to include that. But George Romero, he has, of course, become something of a known quantity around these dissections, hasn't he? Not just with 1982's Creepshow and other works we'll talk about at some point in the future, but more recently, I think just like 2 episodes when we were talking about Christine, named after Romero's ex-wife, actress Christine Forrest. And in fact, Romero straight up name-dropped in the Pet Sematary novel. Lewis, at one point toward the end, compares himself to one of Romero's stupid, lurching movie zombies. So, yeah, it was sort of like this match made in heaven, right? And given Pet Sematary deals directly with people coming back to life, albeit in a rather different way than Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, well, I guess maybe not really, Romero seemed a pretty perfect fit, don't you think? Especially given they already had a pretty good working relationship, and Stephen King wrote the screenplay himself, the first that he wrote and adapted from one of his novels, which is kind of interesting because he didn't really love the novel all that much, but as he explained, sometimes you say to yourself, maybe I can take this and make it a little bit better. Or maybe I just want to face the thing that scares me the most. So I went in and I wrote it. The more you work on a thing, the more numb you get to it. You get to the effect that it has on other people. All well and good, you know, he's giving himself some self-therapy there. That's pretty important. But honestly, it's just too bad that the Romero version never actually happened. That's because, due to some King fatigue in the early 80s after a glut of adaptations, the project was shelved. And while researching this episode, most articles simply pointed out that because filming was delayed, Romero had to unfortunately pull out of the project because he got busy with reshoots for 1988's Monkey Shines. The April 1989 issue of Fangoria includes a little bit more detail about this from a so-called set insider. Producer Richard Rubenstein supposedly had a falling out with Romero somewhere along the lines of the insider. I'd heard that George was given a very short lead time on Pet Sematary. He was finishing up Monkey Shines, and considering his immediate responsibility, he had no choice but to turn down this project. If that is true, the two seem to have patched things up a little later because Rubenstein, who'd already been a producer on Dawn and Day of the Dead, would go on to be a frequent Romero collaborator. Whatever the case, the 1988 Writers Guild of America strike got Paramount, forced Paramount really, to pick this project back up. After all, it was already written. And with Romero out, in comes Mary Lambert. The studio's first choice, she was best known at that point for directing music videos for the likes of Madonna and Janet Jackson, as well as 1987's box office bomb, Siesta. Though, before Pet Sematary released in theaters, she gained some notoriety for the Vatican-denounced music video for Madonna's Like a Prayer, which was shot shortly after Pet Sematary wrapped filming. While I'm not sure exactly why she was the studio's first pick, I assume budget played a part in it, especially when you consider this quote from Stephen King. I wanted to be Mary's advocate on the film because I knew Richard Rubenstein, that is. Rubenstein? Richard Rubenstein, that is. I loved Richard then, and I love him now. He's a great guy, but he's tight with the purse strings. He has to be. So yeah, I'm fairly certain that played a part in it, especially with the writer strike going on. But getting tapped to direct didn't exactly win her any favors, as noted by that same set insider. Some people still think George ought to be directing the movie. She's understandably shaky about the assignment since her professional reputation is riding on it. Lambert's gone on the record to say why she thinks, at the very least, Stephen King, who had final say on director, approved of her. I think it's because I was very good friends with D.D. Ramone, she said. And that sealed the deal. And he knew I loved the book. I've read all of his books. It's pretty hard to fake being a really authentic fan, and I was a huge authentic fan. I loved the material, and I think he knew that I respected it and didn't want to change it or make it my own movie. Reimagine it as something that it wasn't. In addition to all that, it wasn't actually that dissimilar to my first movie, Siesta, about being so obsessed with somebody that you can't die, that you hold off death. All that sounds like rather great reasoning, but that very first thing that she said, the D.D. Ramone friendship, I'm 100% certain that's what landed her the gig. After all, have you read any of the Stephen King novels? He's obviously a fan. He references them in so many different books. Pet Sematary referenced the book. And, of course, Lambert leveraged that friendship. Leveraged by way of just asking to have a Ramones song created exclusively for the movie, appropriately titled Pet Sematary, and one of the band's biggest chart hits. It's been stuck in my head for like a week straight right now. I'm really glad that I get to share it with you. It's a really catchy song. And really, King seemed to have a lot of power over this film. Not only did he write the screenplay, not only did he have a cameo, and I totally understand his cameo in the 97 The Shining adaptation as head of the Gage Creed band on a completely different level now. I just want to say that. He was also on set almost every single day talking new ideas through with Lambert because primary filming was rather close to his house, as stipulated in his contract. When he sold the rights, Pet Sematary had to be shot in Maine because, as noted by Richard Rubenstein, King was concerned about Maine's depressed economy. Don't worry, I looked into it, and Maine's economy boomed in the 80s. Hey, maybe Stephen King had something to do with that. Well done, Stephen. I applaud you. Very nice. But because of King's insistence on filming in Maine, the shoot had to deal with some issues. As Fangoria noted, when the company arrived in mid-August, Maine was experiencing an unprecedented heat wave with temperatures soaring high into the 90s. Now, 6 weeks later, the freezing mark is more like it. Doesn't exactly sound fun, but now, this is kind of cool. You could drive around Maine and visit the exact spots where they filmed, because they're all up there still, including the two homes across the street from each other in Hancock. Sadly, the tree that Lambert and King transplanted from a field somewhere nearby seems to have died, But the houses are still there. And while Jud's may look a little different, what you saw in the film was actually a facade built around the existing home, which they wrapped in asbestos to keep, obviously, from burning in the climax. There's also a hilltop near Sedgwick, Mount Hope Cemetery, Ellsworth Town Hall, and, well, an abandoned granite quarry on Mount Desert Island, and a few Acadia National Park trails, among others. That last bit is a good jumping off point for the parts of this movie that didn't quite work for me. And I think they might work for other people, particularly people who did not read the novel. But of course, I did, and so while the Pet Sematary itself is rather well done, even if maybe not as neat and tidy as I would have expected, it includes such fun little nods, fun, in quotes, obviously, as an ode to Naomi King's deceased pet, Smucky. When the film proceeds beyond that deadfall, I had certain expectations. Because in the novel, this approach is otherworldly. There's a power to it. It carries a glow. There's quicksand. There's ground mist. There's things bumping in the night, breaking off tree limbs left and right in the darkness. This bit in particular, toward the end of the novel, when Lewis is passing through, really stood out to me and really emphasizes how alive this walkway, this treacherous path, feels. The ground mist began to swirl around Lewis, first covering his shoes, then his shins, finally enclosing him in a glowing white capsule. It seemed to him that the light was brighter, a pulsing effulgence like the beat of some strange heart. He had never before felt so strongly the presence of nature as a kind of coalescing force, a real being, possibly sentient. The swamp was alive, but not with the sound of music. If asked to define either sense or the nature of that aliveness, he would have been unable. He only knew that it was rich with possibility and textured with strength. Inside it, Lewis felt very small and very mortal. But what we get in the film is, well, what looks to be a pretty decent hiking trail, one Kim and I would gladly tackle any day of the week. Because, yeah, that's exactly what that is. The most otherworldly it gets is, again, toward the climax of the film, where the deadfall is punctuated with this odd backlight, but still, the ground mist looks like any you would expect from the woods at that time of year and that time of night. And though a tree literally falls right in front of him, Lewis never really seems to be bothered by any of it, does he? Other, of course, than that quick cringe that he has against the terrible CG face that oddly resembles his father-in-law. I checked the script on what that was supposed to be, by the way. Was it really his father-in-law? Because it really did look like him, and I researched this before, and I was like, is that his father-in-law? And I looked around, and a lot of people think it's his father-in-law, and here's how King originally envisioned this in the script. Lewis stops. He looks slowly around. A demonic face takes shape in the mist and floats slowly toward the camera. It runs a tongue out that's about 9 feet long. Its eyes blow out. Blood and thick, gooey stuff runs from the empty sockets. Sure, I mean, a father-in-law's face can look rather demonic, wouldn't you say? I could see that working out. Maybe that was just one of the CG guy's interpretations. Yeah, the father-in-law, that's a demon. The most egregious part of the approach, though, is that abandoned granite quarry that I mentioned. It's just so obviously not natural and completely out of place in the film. Now, I don't know if you know this, but do you see those long grooves in the rock? Those are made when splitting large rock sections with explosive charges, and they're pretty commonplace around New England, at least, wherever you're driving along the highway and there's rocks, and there's a lot of rocks in New England, you'll see these grooves because they blasted their way to make the highway. I think it's pretty commonplace everywhere across America. But you know where it should not be commonplace? A trail through the woods leading to a Micmac burial ground, an inaccessible trail that the general public would not be climbing on or they're probably not blasting for granite along the way. Like, if there was a quarry there, how did they not find the burial ground, right? It's just weird little things. Is the suggestion that the Micmacs had explosive charges and used that to create the burial ground? Is that what is supposed to be implied here? I don't think so. Took me out of the film every single time. But again, that could just be me. Maybe that's not as common as I think. Maybe people across America don't see these grooves and they're not like, oh look, why is that in this movie all of a sudden? And I wouldn't want. I'm not going to harp on this. Okay, if that was the only thing that was an issue for this film, I wouldn't even talk about it. It would just be something that, it happens in a couple seconds. It kind of looks cool, nonetheless, on the film. But it's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? Now, granted, there are some good things about this film, but there are some things that just... Let's talk about the big one, shall we? Louis Creed, as played by Dale Midkiff, who I swore the entire time I was watching this film played the almost identical character in Firestarter. But apparently, I was wrong. Apparently. Talk about a missed opportunity, though, right? In the novel, Louis is... Well, I talked in the last dissection when we were talking about the book that King crafts him so humanly, so believably, that I found myself walking in his shoes, making the exact same decisions, for good and for bad, right through the end. I can't say the same about the film. Here, Louis is a non-character at best, seemingly stuck in the clouds at every turn. He never grabs me, never wins me over, never, even for a second, really draws any sense of empathy. Frankly, he comes off as a loon right from the start, which struck me because, last time I compared the novel to The Shining, I think they are remarkably similar. Here, Midkiff seems to be embodying all of the criticisms leveraged toward Jack Nicholson's portrayal in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining adaptation. How his character was seemingly deranged from the moment we met him. And I'd almost argue with the way that they used that Doc nickname over and over again that the producers or one of the filmmakers noticed this similarity and kind of just went with it and threw it home. But unlike with Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, here it's all just kind of boring. And I can't say this is all Midkiff's fault. His portrayal of the king in 1988's Elvis and Me was generally well-liked, and his thoughts behind the character, as noted in that issue of Fangoria, seem pretty spot on. They have him quoted as saying, "Louis flips, he snaps. He's on to a whole new adventure in search of the meaning of life. He wants to overcome death. He's forced into it by the demise of his son. It's a great part, a real stretch." That sounds good, right? It sounds like an actor trying to act, trying to get the part in his head, get into the character. Maybe the problem lies with the way that the film was filmed. Midkiff goes on to say in that article, "Pet Sematary has been a difficult shoot. I'm playing a character who runs an emotional gamut. It's tough. We're not filming in sequence, so 1 minute I'm calm, and the next I'm bananas. By the end of the movie, I'll be totally insane." And I feel like you could see this in the film where at one point he's fine. He's almost giddy, right, at times. But then, like, in the very next moment, he'll flip. He'll just be nasty. I even made a note while watching at one point that I said, why is he flipping out on Rachel? What did she do? And then, sure enough, the very next moment you see him, he's happy and he's loving. And it is very, very weird. And if it wasn't because of the shooting schedule, maybe it was because of the reported massive cuts that had to be made to the final version of the film, the director's cut of the film, as you were, which have unfortunately been seemingly entirely lost, and supposedly included a Wendigo. One major effect, reported Fangoria, will center around the materialization of an actual Micmac Wendigo, the mechanics of which are still being discussed at press time. I've always pictured the Wendigo as sort of that snow creature from Empire Strikes Back. Like if you say Wendigo, that's where my head goes. You know, that might be because of Uncharted. I don't know. That's just sort of what I picture. I don't know if that's what it's supposed to be, but anyways, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the reasoning why Lewis comes off so jilted, so much of a non-character. It's just weird, and resting your entire film on this seemingly lobotomized version of a character is just, it's bad, but it still wouldn't be so bad if more parts of the film were not poorly presented. But unfortunately, some of them were. A lot of them were, including, we should just talk about it now, Victor Pascow. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with Brad Greenquist's portrayal here, especially with the look of the character. As described in that issue of Fangoria, and yes, I know I am leaning a lot on this article in Fangoria, but I love that magazine, and I miss it, and I have it available. It's all digital on the internet, and it's awesome, and I'm going to use it as much as I can. So anyways, Greenquist hardly fits the traditional image of an angel. Decked out in blood-soaked sweats, pale skin, blackened eyes, and crushed skull with a big flap of skin for that extra touch, he looks every inch a terrifying specter. An angel. Perfectly described, as Lambert uses that exact same word when talking about her intent with the character, calling him a real angel. This demonic presence that looked scary and ghost-like and who haunted Lewis. Pascow was the voice Lewis should have listened to. And if you don't get that at first, the movie will hit you with that point time and time and time and time again. It's like he's this film's version of Uncle Ben, and you're just waiting for him to say more power, more responsibility. But really, it's shoved in our face more than even Jud's "sometimes dead is better" line, and I think he says that 4 times.
Well, sometimes dead is better. Lewis, sometimes dead is better.
Sometimes dead is better. What are you talking about?
Sometimes dead is better.
Why is Pascow in this film so much? I mean, if you're going to streamline the story, you're going to bring it down to its basics, rewrite it. Why are you going to put so much of him in this? Center it more on the family at the very least. It's just such a weird idea. And really, he just seems to be included here as something of a bogus plot point, and to deliver some fun little Easter eggs, like the 666 on the truck that picks up Rachel, and that Cujo-inspired rabies poster hanging on the university wall. And you just know there's some other fun stuff hanging up on that bulletin board. And that's on top of him being part of one of the funniest reshoots I've ever heard of, because they thought Lewis, played by Midkiff, looked a little too sexy in his jockey shorts for the film, so they had to reshoot it in just base pajamas. But I swear, I feel like Pascow is in this movie more than Lewis is. He certainly has more characterization than Lewis, which is rather saying something. I slipped up there for a second, and I almost said Rachel, and that's because Rachel has a lot more characterization than either of them, doesn't she? Now, she's played here by Denise Crosby, and only her second gig following her Star Trek The Next Generation departure. Pet Sematary, fun enough, also marked her 3rd on-screen death in a year. What a record. Generally, Rachel doesn't fare all that much better than Lewis, but the nuance of the film, the characterization of the film, and really just heavily leans in her favor. So much so that at one point while I was watching, I was like, oh, they're gonna kind of switch up the ending. Maybe they're gonna have Rachel take over for Lewis as the main character. After all, it's her past that we learn about, her fear of death that we're told about time and again. Wouldn't it have made sense to have her conquer that fear toward the end, embrace it, overcome it, find ways to beat death? Right? Wouldn't that have been cool? Especially here when Lewis is just really nothing more than a story progressor. That seems like a very logical change. Maybe that's because Rachel's past here, the whole bit about Zelda is so much more terrifying than it is in the book. Even if the storyline is reached only through the terribly random suicide of Missy Dandridge. A character obviously inserted here only as a jumping off point, even though she does give us some fun little lines like this one.
Going to get his
nuts cut, yes. Thank you, Missy, for introducing that colorful phrase into my daughter's vocabulary.
Don't mention it.
And the reason Zelda works so well here, I think, is because obviously she is not played by a 13-year-old girl. As Lambert noted in a 2019 Hollywood Reporter interview, I wanted her to look kind of skinny and bony and have kind of a weird edge to her. And all of the little girls that we brought in for casting were all sweet and pretty and soft and, little girls. And finally, in desperation, I said, let's try casting a little boy. And it just worked. While they did audition boys around the same age, the part eventually, and beautifully, I might add, went to little boy Andrew Hubestek, who was around 25 at the time. And from what I've learned about this role and what Hubestek had to go through for the prosthetics, I'm rather glad a 13-year-old wasn't cast. My experience on the set is a bit of a blur, Hubestek admitted in a 2014 interview with Empire. I got there in the last couple of days of shooting, was put into makeup for at least 14 hours, filmed straight for what seemed like another 18, and then had to be unglued with a solvent for another 6. I was exhausted, sick, and in an altered state, and I think that might have come out in the film. But it was worth it, wasn't it? Every time Zelda is on screen, Pet Sematary's terror is just ratcheted up just that much further. The voice, the mannerisms, the outfit, the prosthetics designed by Lance Anderson, who, after researching meningitis and the effects on the body, wanted to ensure the spine was obviously contorted and the face emaciated. It's also utterly perfect and creepy. And is part of a visual cue that is there on an almost subliminal level. I didn't even pick it up on my first viewing, but I heard about it and I checked it out and it's definitely there. Zelda's outfit matches one of Resurrected Gage's outfits. Don't worry, I saw that one, and we'll be talking Gage more in a second. I'm not dense. I can see this one, that one was clear as day. But it also matches that painting hanging in the Goldman's house. Lambert explained it all to Entertainment Weekly in 2019. I always had a fascination with those old New England paintings. It actually was because of the high infant mortality rate. So many children died at an early age, and they wouldn't have any photographs of them, or pictures, so they would dress them. A lot of those pictures are of dead children that have been dressed so their parents can remember them. That's why they're so creepy. Those portraits of 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old children dressed in weird little outfits and really stiff. That was my inspiration for how Gage comes back, because that's a form of bringing somebody back from the dead. I had it painted especially for the movie. First, we designed the costume that we were going to put Gage in at the end, and then we had the portraitist do the painting of the little boy in the costume that reflects it. Then, we designed the costume for Zelda to be like the Nightmare Girl version of it, so it's really kind of the evil spirit working through all these machinations to come back and destroy Rachel. I didn't make that connection, but I like it. I think it's cool that it's included. I wish I had caught it. I think I was too distracted by Pascow being in here so much. Like, why was he in there? I don't understand that choice. I really don't. Although I didn't understand the choice to completely change Jud and the nature of the cemetery either. Now, Jud's played here by Fred Gwynne, obviously best known for his role as Herman Munster on The Munsters. Though in my head, I generally will picture him now as that judge from My Cousin Vinny, because why wouldn't I?
That is a lucid, intelligent, well-thought-out objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Overruled.
And that was something of an issue going into the film. There was total pushback from several of the executives at Paramount, Lambert admitted to Filmmaker magazine. They felt that Fred would be laughable, and that he would take you out of the movie and not be frightening. When I read the script, I knew it had to be Fred Gwynne, and I was obsessed with him playing the role. He was one of the most amazing actors I ever worked with. He was so in control of his craft and loved the role. He told me over and over again how much he loved the part. He said he put the part on like a garment. The role just fit him. She's right. It did. I mean, Gwyn is just fantastic here. He embodies his role and steals every single scene that he's in. So when I say what I'm about to say, it's no knock against him. I think he was perfect for this role, but seriously, Jud. He is an awful person. As Lambert put it, his character was like the Dark Angel, the voice that Louis Creed should not have listened to. And while in the book, you can kind of chalk it up to Jud having the best of intentions, that he's really trying to get that sometimes dead is better point across. In this film, even though he says sometimes dead is better so many times, far more times than he ever truly needed to say it. But did you catch it that last time? Oh, here it is, coming right around the corner. He's going to say it again. The cemetery, the Micmac burial ground in this film, is truly sour, and no one in their right mind would ever suggest using it, especially for a cat. Again, in the novel, we're told that the burial ground has been used several times over the years. Jud uses it for his dragon spot, his dog spot. Dog spot, sorry, had monsters on the brain, and that joke was just too cute to not include. But yes, anyway, Spot, he uses it for his dog Spot, and Spot, of course, comes back. When I got downstairs, Jud says in the novel, my mother was backed into a corner in the pantry between our icebox and one of the counters. There was a bunch of white stuff on the floor, curtains she'd been meaning to hang. Standing in the doorway of the pantry was Spot, my dog. There was dirt all over him and mud splashed clear up his legs. The fur on his belly was filthy, all knotted and snarled. He was just standing there, not growling or nothing, just standing there. But it was pretty clear that he had backed her into a corner, whether he meant to or not. The dog's filthy, stinking, described at one point as seeming like just a piece of meat. But, as Jud explains a little bit later, and this is the key point here, Spot was always a good dog. He always smelled like dirt. It didn't matter how many times you washed him. He always smelled like dirt. But he was a good dog. My mother would never touch him afterward, but he was a good dog just the same. That's not how it goes down in the film at all, where a bloodied Spot basically returns in full-on Cujo mode. Our second Cujo connection, right? And the only other example that we get in the film is Timmy Baterman, who we know in the novel came back bad, but here just seems so much worse. Somehow so much worse, especially when screaming love dead, hate living. And this example prompts Jud to explain, the person you put up there ain't the person that comes back. It may look like that person, but it ain't that person. Because whatever lives in the ground beyond the Pet Sematary ain't human at all. Nothing good can possibly come out of the cemetery. It ain't human over there. It's all going to come back bad. And Lewis finds this out firsthand, doesn't he? With Church. Church, by the way, was played by 7 British shorthairs trained for specific on-camera actions, including one that could cuddle, one that could hiss, and a stuffed one that could come off the ground like a piece of ticky tape coming off of leather, as Jud put it. And, you know, what an amazing job with the effects here, including that, I don't know, let's call it Church's second death, right? Which just looks awfully real, but was all rigged and supervised by a representative from American Humane. But I mean, the cat throws a dead rat into Lewis's bathtub. He is obviously not an okay cat. Plus, he's got those glowing eyes. An effect done simply by putting a light above the camera lens. But my God, why would you want one of those things running around your house? Honestly. Like, if my cat had glowing eyes like that and scratched me the moment that I picked it up the first time, I'm out. I'm out. That is not coming in. But even with all of that, even experiencing all of that, events play out as they do in the book, as we have come to expect them to. Lewis tries to bring his son back. But we know what's going to happen before it even happens, don't we? And, you know, there's no suspicion, no suspense, no doubt. we know here. Like I knew in the book, but it's not in a good way this time. It's just there's no possibility of it having any other outcome. I mean, it can only be bad. Though, I will say, that doesn't mean that the climax wasn't just a thrill ride of a finale. Right from that Carrie homage to the toss ball to the creepy let's play hide and go seek, that brutal tendon slicing. And there's just something special seeing someone as prominent a part of my childhood as Fred Gwynne just getting hacked up this way. There really is. The no longer quite implied cannibalism, Gage with that walking stick, the creepiest phone call in the history of phone calls, and that sheer hallway lunacy of a fight. What an amazing climax. Sure, it could have used a little less Pascow, but of course, I mean, it's part of the movie. Of course, it could have used a little less Pascow. But I think a part of what really makes this ending work, what sells this ending, is Miko Hughes, who played Gage, and who Lambert literally had to fight to hire because the studio was pressuring her to hire twins to sort of combat on-set labor laws. Worth noting here, Ellie's played by twins Blaze and Bo Burdall, though Bo is credited as Ellie Creed too. We'll talk Ellie more in depth another time. But Miko here, he was only 2 years old at the time of filming, and he's just so cute, isn't he? It's just all of his mannerisms when he's running around. It's just, oh, what a cute little kid. I mean, obviously, until he isn't. Though that isn't always him. That isn't always a human. That isn't always Miko Hughes. As Lambert noted, I felt a tremendous moral obligation not to traumatize him. He was never in the room with blood. Anytime there's blood and you see a head or hand, it's a puppet. The one exception was that scene where Lewis put him down with a needle, but we had been working up to it for quite a while longer and he was really up for doing that scene. In fact, they seem to have made filming these scenes pretty fun. It was always a game for him and he was part of the group, Lambert recalled. Fred Gwynne was wonderful working with him. Come on, we're going to play a game and I'm going to lie down on the floor and you're going to jump on me. Okay, I want you to climb out from under the bed and scare me. Boo! Miko always had one specific thing to do, jump out from under the bed and be scary, or walk across the room and growl like a dog. He would do it, and then we'd all clap and tell him what a great job he had done. He was the star of the moment. Yes, there are a few shots where the Child's Play comparisons can easily be thrown at the film, and it could have probably been tightened up a little bit, I'm going to be honest, but overall, especially with the intercuts to happy, healthy, alive Gage, and the kid's final, playful, demonic line.
No fair. No fair, no fair.
What an effective conclusion. Certainly more so than the actual conclusion, which originally followed the book's ambiguity, but was deemed a little too tame. So a more graphic ending was reshot for the final cut. I don't know how Lewis could possibly want to not just embrace but kiss someone with blood pouring out of their eyes, but you do you, Lewis. I guess Midkiff was right. I mean, you are at that point in the film totally, unbelievably, absolutely batshit crazy. Learn from his mistake, everyone. Do not go kissing people with bleeding eyes. I think we're going to wrap it for there today. I feel like I've been talking for a long time, but this is not the end of our Pet Sematary discussion. A rather disappointing sequel to this film, also directed by Mary Lambert and appropriately titled Pet Sematary 2, came out just a few years later, and though it referenced the first film, was about all new characters. That's pretty much all that I'm going to say about that film. I see no reason to really talk about it, and I don't think it's ever going to be mentioned again. I don't think, anyways. But next time we will be talking about the BBC Radio 4 audio dramatization of Pet Sematary. And that's something altogether pretty new for me, and definitely new for this channel, so I'm kind of excited about that one. And Until we return for that, cheers to all of you for watching, for listening, for hearing me rant about far too much Pascow. And if you enjoyed any of this, please be sure to like the episode. Please share it with your friends. Please leave a comment below. Please subscribe to that channel. And head on over to drunkonwriting.com to get more episodes more often, including lots of Pet Sematary dissections, apparently. Why are there so many adaptations? I mean, it is a great book. I guess I answered my own question there. So, anyways, until next time, cheers, and keep on writing.